My name is Jerry Gill. Today is September 21, 2009. I'm visiting with Shannon Ferrell on the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the Osage Storage Project in the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Shannon, again, thank you for taking time to interview with us today.
My pleasure.
And of course, we'll be talking about you personally, but also about our Scholar Development and Recognition Program, and who better than one of our former recipients.
So it's one of the products of that program.
Exactly. Well, but Shannon, why don't we kind of back up a little bit? First of all, can you tell me about your early life? A little bit about where you grew up, your family, some of those things.
Absolutely. I was actually born in Stillwater to a couple of folks who were at the time were both OSU employees. Mm-hmm. My mom worked for the university and was doing some student teaching at that time. Mm-hmm. My dad worked for the research range out here, so cowboy born and bred, so to speak. Actually lived in Stillwater first couple of years of my life, and then we moved to our family farm in Leedy, where I really grew up. Dad was a farmer and rancher. Mom helped him out, and then later on, Mom became a OSU Extension educator for Roger Mills County about the time I was in the 7th grade. So there again, I was once again part of the OSU family. Given that kind of heading to OSU was kind of always out there. I just knew from, I think the first time I was truly cognizant of it, I think it was the 1st grade. I was like, all right, got to go to college, got to go to OSU. And it was really never another thought other than that. It was like, go to college, going to OSU. It was a no-brainer for me. So.
And your favorite mascot was Pistol Pete.
That's right. That's right. My principal joked that my senior year I spent more time on campus up here than I did in high school anyway, which is probably about right. So.
What were there some values and lessons that you learned growing? I guess you lived on the farm, and there were some values that you learned growing up that helped shape you in later in life.
Oh, absolutely. Probably the two foremost ones were to set goals. And that's something that, not a lot of kids hear a lot, is the importance of setting goals for yourself. But from day one, my parents worked really hard to instill that in me. When I talk about wanting to go to OSU from the time I was a 1st grader, that's because my parents said, look, college education is very important. You got to start thinking about it, first thing out of the gate. And it wasn't just that, but they taught me to do that in every area of my life. And that's what got me so involved in extracurricular activities, got me so involved in scholarships that at the high school level was setting that goal. Because as a farm kid, growing up in the, mid-late 80s, early 90s, when farming wasn't exactly, making money hand over fist in Oklahoma, Mom and Dad basically said, look, if you want to go to college, you have to pay for it. So that's another goal you have to set for yourself, is financially position yourself so that you can do that. And that's what was a powerful motivator when you're filling out those scholarship applications. The other thing is, it sounds generic and it may even be trite, but it's so true. It's just working hard. Nothing really comes easy out in the Western frontier. And that's actually kind of a good thing for a kid to grow up in, because that taught you, if something's hard, you keep chewing at it and you keep working on it, and eventually you wear it down and you can do it, but you got to stick to it. And the first time you get knocked down, you're not down for the count, you just get back up and come at it again. I'd say those are the two biggest lessons that definitely got instilled in me early on.
You lose a crop, you replant. Huh?
Exactly right.
What kind of farming and ranching operations did y'all have?
We had basically a wheat and cattle operation. Most of it was, the cattle was probably the biggest side, but we did lots of cultivation too. And I got to admit, I was never much of a literal cowboy. I was definitely an OSU cowboy, but not much of a literal cowboy. I was more of the, my dad called it the tractor jock. I was an equipment pilot most of my days, so I spent a lot of my formative years on orange tractors, good old Dallas Chalmers that the family owned. But wheat and cattle was primarily what we did.
Jen, what were some of your high school experiences, activities that you participated in?
Well, I was talking to somebody about this just not very long ago, the fact that Leedy High School, where I went, Leedy High School, was so small. And it's nothing uncommon for Oklahoma, but our graduating class was 22 students, and at that point in time, when that class was graduating in 1994, that was the largest class in Leedy School. Everybody was smaller than 22. Most of them were in the low to mid-teens in class size. So I joke with folks that we couldn't have cliques, because if you were a clique, you'd be the only member of it. Everybody kind of had to do everything, and that that actually worked out really well for us because I really think that you had the opportunity to be involved in more things because everybody was in FFA and everybody was in 4-H and everybody had some involvement with the sports teams. I didn't play sports, but the guy still kept me involved. I was the announcer, manager, all that sort of stuff. So I'd say probably the biggest things that I was involved in high school and the things that probably shaped me the most was 4-H. Very active in 4-H. Eventually went on to be a state officer, and to the extent that we have national officers, I held a couple of those positions as well as a national 4-H ambassador and as a national 4-H Congress Committee member. And 4-H is one of those things that whenever you're interviewing for a scholarship or an award on campus, and after the interview, the judges talk to you, they always say, were you involved in 4-H or were you involved in FFA? Because they could always tell that those kids that had that experience and being up in front of people, it really shone through. And that was a big chunk of it. But I think that the bigger part about 4-H for me was I got a lot of my belief in self from being involved in 4-H. And some people kind of wonder what I mean by that. Well, I was not a very confident kid. Until I became really involved in 4-H. I was like, I'm a nerd. What do I really have to offer anybody? I'll just stay over here and read and I'll be fine with that. But 4-H is a wonderful organization because it gets youth involved, not only in learning themselves, but it involves them in teaching younger children. And I really started to gain some value from that and said, wow, I really have something I can offer somebody else, and that gave me a lot of confidence. And without that confidence, I know I would not have done what I did when I was here at OSU. The other two things that I was involved in a lot were speech and academic bowl, which again just gave me the opportunity to kind of mix it up with kids from other schools, get to know them, and kind of expand my horizons a little bit. And it was it was one of those rare high school atmospheres where it was okay, and in fact even admired to be smart. It was okay to be bookish in those that actually served you pretty well, and that helped me out a lot too.
Shannon, in addition to farming ranching, did your parents work outside of the farm?
Yeah, like I said, my mother worked for OSU Cooperative Extension, which was another great way of plugging me into a lot of opportunities and getting me connected with the university. My dad was a farmers co-op manager at a couple of the towns nearby to where we lived, and so I learned a lot through that as well, being getting to be the cheap help whenever he was shorthanded, and of course when you're the kid of the boss, none of the labor laws apply to you, so they can tell you to do whatever. So, but that was fun too, and again, that was a good way to get mixed up with some folks from other towns as well, and kind of expand those horizons.
Well, I have the next question we'll pass on by was what inflation wrote up on the state. I think we've already
I think
that question.
Yeah, that was, like I said, that was pretty much a no-brainer.
What were your early impressions of Oklahoma City? I'm sure you've been on campus a lot, but as a student, you first come here as a freshman.
I think I was kind of surprised by how much OSU was like a small town. And a big chunk of that was the fact that so many of us at OSU come from small towns, and we just kind of carry those values with us. But even folks that were from Tulsa, Oklahoma City, or the big out-of-state towns, all seem to fit into part of this OSU culture, and it's so welcoming and so embracing. Just last week, I had the opportunity to interview some of the candidates that were up for homecoming royalty. And it was amazing to me that, even all these years after I graduated, almost to a person, it was uncanny how similar their answers were when we asked them what was one of their favorite things about OSU. They all said how welcoming of a place it was. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about OSU was that there was something for anybody. Like I said, when you're from a small town, everybody does everything, and those folks are your friends because that's who you got. And at OSU, when you come here from a small town for the first time in your life, perhaps you have the opportunity to kind of seek out your own crowd and to kind of build that yourself. And I was so amazed by the fact that there were actually other people out there that thought like me and, were interested in the same things I did. No matter what the interest was, I could find somebody to kind of be a partner in crime there. Those were the two things that really stood out to me when I first showed up.
Your major was ag econ from the get-go?
That's right.
Why ag econ?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, I suppose. The more noble reason was I kind of felt a draw to the business side of agriculture, and I entertained ideas of either going into law or policy, maybe elected office, and thought that the tools I would need to understand those decisions would come from ag econ. That's the noble reason. The reason I'm probably not as proud of, this is kind of mimicry. When I first came here as a freshman, I really thought I wanted to go into politics. And our congressional representative at that point in time, still is today, Frank Lucas, was a ag econ major. So I thought, well, if I want to be like Frank, I should be an ag econ major. So
From Western Oklahoma?
From Western Oklahoma. So they're just following Frank's footsteps.
Well, obviously, as you're talking about having a plan, your parents taught you were a very focused student. And did you have an academic plan here at Oklahoma State when you came here as a freshman? I mean, specific ideas about where you wanted to go as an undergraduate, what you wanted to do?
I knew of some of those scholarships out there, those big scholarships, and one I'd actually heard of from one of Mom's coworkers was the Truman Scholarship. And in a story I'm sure Bob Grauman will be happy to regale you with at some point in time, this freshman from Leedy, Oklahoma, sets up an appointment like the first few weeks he's on campus and marches into the office and says, Dr. Grauman, I'm Shannon Ferrell. I want to be a Truman Scholar and a Rhodes Scholar. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. So come in there, guns blazing, thinking I'm just going to just take this stuff down. And I think I knew it may have been more work than I thought I had in my mind. But still, I thought, I'll just go in here and we'll get this lined out. So I did want to do those things, and as you know, I succeeded at the Truman, did not succeed at the Rhodes, but in retrospect, I think I was more of a Truman guy than a Rhodes guy anyway. And Dr. Grauman was great about kind of guiding me through those goals, and so I was so grateful that there was somewhere to go, kind of that one-stop shop to say, hey, if someone has this kind of aspiration, what kind of plan do they need to put in place? Because I knew the goal was out there to be a scholar, and I knew people from OSU had done it, but I didn't know the pathway to get from where I was to where I wanted to be.
And the preparation would be necessary for that.
Exactly.
Sure. Well, speaking of that, were there some professors, administrators early on that influenced you and helped direct and guide you? Just not necessarily for scholarship, but just for university.
Absolutely. Other than Dr. Grauman, which of course, that goes without saying, but I was extraordinarily blessed to have an absolutely outstanding advisor in Dr. Joe Williams. Dr. Williams has enough Advisor of the Year plaques. You could build a small house out of just the plaques. But it was, so coincidental. The way that I got affiliated with Dr. Williams was that his daughters were very active in 4-H, and they were the same age as and I hung out with them a lot. So whenever I was coming to campus for a 4-H event, they just invite me, hey, why don't you stay at our house while you're in Stillwater? And that's how I got to meet Dr. Williams. So as soon as he found out I was enrolling, he's like, you're mine. I don't care what day it is, you're my advisee. And he took such fantastic care of me. I can tell you a few stories, but I'll tell you a lot of stories. I will tell you this one.
It's okay, go right ahead.
And Dr. Williams and I look at this story as different examples, like depending on your perspective of it. But I was filling out the Truman application. Again, I've been working on the Truman application for years, getting myself prepared. And what I had not realized was the deadline for the recommendation letters. And Dr. Williams was one of my recommendation letters, but I didn't realize how quickly I needed them. So the deadline was looming large, and I had to find Dr. Williams. He was on vacation. He was elk hunting in the mountains. I don't know how we managed to get a hold of him, but we got a hold of Dr. Williams, who rode his pack mule down the mountain to the nearest town, found, where he could get to a typewriter and a fax machine, and made that recommendation letter out and shot it back to me so it would make it into the packet in time. Now, he would tell you that story as an example of you need to get those undergrads lined out and help them have some sense of deadline. But I use that story as an example of just exactly how devoted Dr. Williams was to his students. It did not matter what. If it needed done for his students, he would get it done. So that's one person. Another person would be Dr. Wes Hawley. Dr. Hawley was at the time, I believe, the assistant dean for academics in the College of Agriculture. And as such, was responsible for the freshman orientation program, but I think kind of unofficially served as the leader for groups like Ag Council and lots of the student leadership roles. And I got to know Dr. Hawley really well, and he was a tremendous mentor to me. In a relationship that kind of transcended academic departments. He was just an outstanding mentor and really guided me along in my process and constantly encouraged me, supported me, and helped me keep a level head about things too. And so between Dr. Williams and Dr. Hawley, I was extraordinarily blessed to have two mentors like that in my academic career.
Or in addition to the academic things you're talking about, were you involved in student leadership activities and organizations? Could you share a little bit of the non-scholar participation things?
Probably one of my favorites was being a member of the Ag Student Council. I was, again, blessed enough that as a freshman, I got to join the group as one of their freshman representatives on the council. And so, again, got to be involved with some extraordinary leaders at the college level. For example, Sean Copeland, very prominent alumni, great business leader now, but was a tremendous leader here as a student as well. And really enjoyed getting to work with him. And I loved Ag Council so much because it wasn't departmental. I loved my department. By all means, I loved my department, but I loved getting to interact with everybody. Mm-hmm. And that was a great place where, plant soil scientists and ag engineers and ag economists and everybody, animal scientists, all work together. And I'm one of those guys that just loves to learn. Again, that may be a nerdish trait, but I guess it's good for a scholar to have, I suppose. But I just loved learning about what everybody else was up to. And that was a great opportunity. And, we talked earlier about that sense of community. And I think in the College of Ag, that was exemplified so well in Ag Student Council because all these kids from all these backgrounds came together. And it was almost like, having a barn race. And every week when we met, everyone got together and did great things because of the work ethic and the vision that they each individually had.
Shannon, you talked about going on visiting with Bob Grauman, who head of Scholar Development Recognition Program early on. Mm-hmm. How did you, and then beyond that, how did you become involved and engaged in the Scholar Development Program? Well,
during that initial meeting that I had with Dr. Grauman, he kind of laid out, if you want to be a Truman Scholar, these are the characteristics that panel looks for. And if you have those, let's look and see how we can cultivate that and make you a richer candidate. And if you wanted to go for the roads, this is the kind of candidate they look for. How can we cultivate those traits as well? So we kind of laid out a plan there. But the other thing that really helped me out a lot was Dr. Grauman's Windows in the World class, which I believe he still teaches, which was an honors class. And it was designed to help students start to play around with the type of discussion that they would have if they were a candidate being interviewed for one of the national prestige scholarships. The way that Dr. Grauman handled the class was we would pick an issue each week. We'd have some reading, and we would have a class discussion about that. And it was good for a valedictorian from Leedy to be in that class because I might have been a valedictorian from Leedy, but there were some other people out there with much more intellectual horsepower than I had. And I learned in that class in a very respectful way, in a very nurturing way, that there's some competition out there and you've got to improve. It's not good enough to be at the level you are now. You've got to become more eloquent. You have to become better read. You have to expand the breadth of your interests and recognize there's a lot of smart people out there, going after the same stuff. So, but that was a wonderful environment to be in, and that class, I think, really accelerated my preparation for those activities.
You talk about meeting with Bob and kind of developing a plan. What would be parts of that plan, Shannon? What are specifically some things you need to do to cultivate and develop yourself?
Well, one of the things that they do a great job of is helping you identify what your passions and your strengths are. Because that's kind of the core of the candidate that you're going to be. And, I tell the story about trying out for the roads and being, I didn't get it. It wasn't a successful quote, quote, trip. But in retrospect, that's because I think I wasn't really I wasn't really a roads kind of candidate. And I was trying to make myself be somebody that I just wasn't. I wasn't that guy.
Would you describe that as more liberal arts kind of person?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was more of a technical, kind of a pragmatic kind of scholar, and so the Truman was a great fit for me because with the Truman, you're focusing on a policy issue, coming up with a practical, implementable solution to that, and that worked for me. That was a fit. So one of the things that the Scholar Development Program helped me do is realize who I am and how to enrich that person, so to speak. How to kind of expand around that core. That included things as kind of simple as identifying good classes to take, expanding out just what your degree sheet says, using those electives wisely, so to speak. But that also includes just having the opportunity to interact with folks of, that high caliber of individual. And being part of the Scholar Development Program gave me the opportunity to go to functions where I would meet with, past successful candidates and with leaders on campus and off campus. And being in that environment, interacting with those folks kind of brings life to that proverb as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. And putting yourself in those environments and forcing yourself to interact in a cadre of folks that you may not be accustomed to really helped me kind of hone my interview skills, my discussion skills, and kind of realize that I needed to have a breadth of knowledge to speak intelligently about whatever the important issues were at the time.
Shannon, part of a question you were alluding to earlier about identifying kind of who you were and the plan and doing some research and policy. Were you part of the freshman research program?
I was.
Could you speak to those two programs?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was very blessed to have a freshman research scholarship and was able to kind of leapfrog from that into 3 WINS projects. So I was very, very blessed that every year I was here, I had some sort of undergraduate research project. And most of those centered around rural economic development, which was one of my passions. And that was so perfect for my Truman application because that, again, gave me that depth of knowledge about an issue that not a lot of folks knew about and fed perfectly into my policy statement, which wound up being about business incubators as a tool for developing small businesses in rural Oklahoma. And having that undergraduate research experience was just invaluable from a number of perspectives. First off, it's something that at that point in time, hardly any undergraduates did. So it was a true standout item on your application if you could show that you'd had research experience there. And as a matter of fact, it even enabled me to have some published work and to do a presentation at a professional conference when how many undergraduates get to do that. The other thing about it was it showed that you had the ability to articulate a project, apply for a grant, you receive it, administer it. Again, showed a lot of leadership in a unique role where, again, many undergraduates didn't have the opportunity for that kind of academic leadership as well. So I think OSU probably owes a larger debt than we realize to the folks that sponsor the freshman research scholars and the WINS scholarships, because that gives our students just fantastic and unique opportunities.
And I'm hearing you kind of describe parts of the preparation components, if you will, of the scholar recognition program. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit different for each candidate. It's a combination of some of the outside classwork, some electives you take, meeting with Bob Grauman, participating in some of the special Winners in the World program that he has. Mm-hmm. It's research programs. It's there's some things I'm missing about different components of that program.
I think you've got them all, and I think if you look at that as a whole, the unspoken thing there is finding your passion and then expressing it. because it's easy for candidates to talk a good game when they're in an interview and show that they know a lot about this policy issue or that policy issue, but that's kind of easy to see through. What I think we've been so successful at here at Oklahoma State University is identifying students that really have a genuine passion for something. With me, it was all my work in rural economic development, and another excellent recent example would be Courtney Timmons in the biosystems department. Courtney was one of the people that organized Real Cowboys Recycle, and it'd be easy for a ag engineer or an environmental engineer to talk about the importance of recycling and sustainability, but you see folks at OSU don't just talk about policy, they go out and start wildly successful recycling programs. They've actually done something about it, and that's because I think, again, they've identified that passion in themselves. This is something that I genuinely have a concern for, and then they actually go out and do something about it.
Great. Appreciate that explanation. Specifically preparing for your Truman, maybe focusing on your competition for the Truman Scholarship, what are some specific things you did to prepare yourself for that competition?
Speaking about the application and the competition itself, we're kind of divorce ourselves from the career preparation, right. But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, you fill out an application packet, you go to an interview. So how do you prepare for that? Again, OSU does such a tremendous job of having lots of folks that were willing to look at my application materials, make lots of constructive comments, lots of red pens died at the hands of my applications for all the people that marked them up, but it made it so much better. The other tremendously valuable thing that we did, and this is something that was a really rare asset, was because we'd had some success at those programs in the past. We had some faculty members who had the benefit of working with those past candidates, some of them that had been interviewers in some of those selection panels. So we had a wonderfully rigorous, if you can use that word, wonderfully rigorous mock interview program where 2 or 3 times, at each stage of the process, as a candidate advanced, they would put together these mock interview panels and give you the real world combat environment where they were lobbing the high fast ones at you. You were getting the chin music when you were up at the plate. But that was tremendously valuable for me because I'd never been in an interview environment like that. I'd interviewed for scholarships and interviewed for campus positions, but never in an environment like the national scholarships put you in. And having that experience took so much of the fear out of the process because you knew you weren't jumping into the unknown when you had the real interview. So the application reviews at all levels, at the college, the university level, and the mock interviews were probably the biggest pieces of the training program as you went to the selection process itself.
Shannon, some of the application process, could you explain on that application the types of questions they would ask on the application itself and what they wanted you to say about yourself?
Certainly. Of course, you have kind of the usual CV information, where have you been, what have you done? But with the Truman at that point in time, you had a series of essay questions with fairly narrow limits, so you couldn't go on forever, about specific examples of leadership that you had performed, specific aspirations you had for service, your plans for graduate study, a very detailed plan of study for your graduate program as part of the Truman application. And the last, but perhaps most important piece is your policy statement, wherein you pick a policy issue and you pick a specific individual to whom it is going to be addressed. It needs to be a name, it needs to be a position, it needs to be a specific agency. So basically, it's like you're preparing a policy recommendation for a real person and handing it to them. And in your policy statement, you outline a solution that needs to be, implementable. It can't be a pie in the sky. If we had unlimited resources, this is what we'll do. It needs to be a very, realistic, implementable solution to some real problem. With my application, we were in the midst of a new farm bill. And at that point in time, there was a lot of debate about payments to farmers in the form of commodity payments, which isn't really news. Every time we have a farm bill, it's the same debate every time. But I thought, aha, I've got something. I'm gonna derail this debate because there was talk about eliminating a few commodity programs, and I said, okay, with the money that we're going to save from those commodity programs, let's take those funds and invest them in establishing these rural business incubators to kind of provide some diversity to the rural economy and use the incubators to help businesses when they're in their most vulnerable phase. When most businesses fail, is they're in those startup stages, and that was the way we could show it was implementable, was by taking a kind of zero sum game and deducting some federal expenses here and creating them there. And that's probably the most challenging part for lots of candidates is, okay, how do you pay for it? So that's how the Truman application kind of flows.
That's one of the areas where, in addition to your background of learning to write, and that's where review by mentors and faculty members help you with your application process.
Absolutely.
In addition to doing helping you with mock interviews.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, it worked out tremendously because that was actually the topic of my WINCE research project that year. I've been studying business incubators here in the state of Oklahoma, and so it fed just right into that. And I had the benefit of having Dr. Woods here in the Department of Ag Econ, who's a rural development specialist. He was my mentor in the research project, and then he helped me provide a review of the policy. Was that something that was feasible, and were we using the right language? Was this something that would speak to folks? So
what a synergy there between the students and the faculty. It's wonderful, isn't it?
It's tremendous, absolutely tremendous. Cannot say enough about it.
So the interview, one interview, and the application, and just one interview.
One interview.
Where did you interview? Can you tell me a little about the interview?
The interview was held in Dallas, Texas, at the Federal Reserve branch down there, and so that there's no opportunity for the questions that the community's asking to leak out, you're sequestered for the whole day. You go to the interview, you report in at a specific time, and you're in a room with your fellow candidates for the whole day. So you kind of hope you're one of those first interviews so you can kind of, breathe the air of sweet freedom again. And while I was sitting in the interview room, I remember thinking, I love OSU. I love what they've done for me. I'm a pretty good candidate, but I'm going to get destroyed. These guys are phenomenal. Everyone's there and they're talking and they're making, chit chat, and no one's being boastful or trying to intimidate anybody. It was a wonderfully genial group, but in just talking about their experiences, I thought, my gosh, this guy's done study abroad in this country. This guy's done these community service projects. I'm going to get creamed here, kids. It's not even going to be close. But I kind of shoved all that aside. I said, you know what? I've got a reason to be here. They selected me, so they must think I'd at least be entertaining to talk to, if nothing else. So I went in there and did my best. And I think we do a good job of training, because I think they had me to the point where I thought it was just going to be all out, bloody combat from the first time I stepped in there. And the interview panel was actually very genial. It was an enjoyable conversation.
How many were in the panel?
I want to say, I can't recall if it was 5 or 7. It was a decently large panel. And I got frustrated at a couple of my answers. I remember they asked me, if you could go anywhere to vacation, where would you go? And speaking honestly, I said, well, I'd like to go to DC because I love, the government system. I love to learn about it. I love to be there. Well, they thought that was too much of a Truman interview answer. So they said, all right, forget that. Where would you go internationally? And I said, well, I'd like to go to Rome. Well, why Rome? I was like, well, that's, obviously the seat of the Roman government, where we got a lot of the structure of our democratic system there. And they're like, no, that's a Truman answer again. Where would you go? I was like, Chicago. It's a really fun town. I went there at 4-H Congress, go to Mike Jordan's restaurant. I don't know, hang out at the Field Planetarium, get some Chicago pizza. I guess that was it. And then, of course, Dr. Grumman will tell you this story, but then there's the infamous envelope of dirt. Has Bob ever told you that story?
No, I haven't.
I'll wrap myself out. Bob tells us every time we're in the same room, and I suppose it deserves retold, but I thought I needed some sort of hook. You're going to interview, approximately 15 to 20 amazingly qualified candidates over the course of the day. how are you going to remember this kind of generic looking kid from Oklahoma who's got a really strong ag background? Well, the week before I left the farm as a freshman, I took an old mason jar and I went out to the field that was my field. Dad had given me a field, so that was mine to cultivate, that I got the revenues from it and everything else. So I went out to my field and I scooped up a jar of dirt, so I'd always have a little bit of home with me. I thought, well, you know what? This is going to be, local kid done good if I can pull this off. So I took a little bit of the dirt from that jar and I put it in a little envelope and I took it with me to the interview. We get to the end of the interview, it's like, is there anything that you'd like for us to know, Mr. Ferrell, that you already told us about? I thought for a second and I pulled out this envelope of dirt that I'd brought from home. It's dirt. It's red Oklahoma clay dirt. And I tell him the story of where this dirt came from. And I said, you know what? This dirt kind of represents me. This is my tie to rural Oklahoma. I want to make a difference for those folks. And that's why I carry this with me, to show my connection to the people that, farmed this land the same as I did. I'm hoping, that it was either the merits of my other answers or maybe that was the hook. I don't know, but I got the scholarship. So to this day, Bob Grauman could not believe that I did that. I'm sure he shrinks in embarrassment every time he hears it, but that's what I did.
Did you find out that same day, Shannon, at the end of the day, at the interview, or how did you get notification?
It was, how did we find out? There's a funny story in itself. I found out because I was sitting in my farm appraisal class here in the Ag Econ department. And at the time, President Halligan comes in, followed by Dr. Grauman, and some folks with some balloons. I thought, this is really odd. What is going on? And President Halligan goes up to Dr. Kluttke, the instructor, and says, Dr. Kluttke, we're so sorry to interrupt your class, but can we borrow your class for just a second? And Dr. Halligan says, we've just received word that one of your students was a successful candidate for the Truman Scholarship, and it was Shannon Ferrell. Oh, I shrank. I was terribly ecstatic, but embarrassed at the same time. But it was wonderful. It was one of the standout moments, in my college career. I'll never forget it. But I have to say, here's the funny thing. That day, I was interviewing for an internship with the Noble Foundation, and the interviewers from the Noble Foundation asked if I'd like to go to lunch with them. And I said, well, guys, I would love to, but I have to turn in an assignment in my farm appraisal class, otherwise I'd go with you. And if that homework assignment had not been due that day, I would have missed class because I would have been going to lunch with those guys. That's what everybody says, when a potential employer asks you if you want to go out, you can go out with them.
Oh, yeah.
So I would have missed that class, and Dr. Halligan and Dr. Grauman would have went to a classroom without a Shannon Ferrell in it, because their Truman Scholar would have skipped class that day if it hadn't been for that assignment.
Great story. Well, Shannon, how is your selection as a Truman Scholar? How has it impacted your life, initially and now?
Well, I would almost say that the initial impact has actually been the same as it is today. And that is that, the scholarship money is great. There's no bones about that. But I would I would place that second to just the fact that it opens so many doors. Being a Truman Scholar, understandably, the university kind of wants to showcase, say, hey, this is a Truman Scholar, and that gave me so many opportunities to visit with, people like regents, the large supporters of the university, the administration, opportunities I just would not have had it not been for that. And it reinforced to me that, wow, if I can hang out with this cadre of individual, maybe I can make a difference, and again, it gave me that confidence to try things and do things that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that's still true to this day. And I really appreciate it now because it gives me the opportunity to work with the candidates of today. And, I don't know that I'd have the opportunity to work with so many of those fantastic students if it wasn't for the fact that I myself was a scholar. And so I still appreciate the fact that just the fact of having that honor really provides just a lot of opportunities.
Well, aside from your selection as a Truman Scholar, how did your participation in the Scholar Program impact you personally, help you develop as a student and as a person? If you hadn't won the Truman Scholarship, how would it impact you?
Well, and I was actually telling some students that were kind of identifying themselves as when I participate in the Scholar Development Program. I was telling this a couple of weeks ago. We were talking just a few minutes ago about the interview day, being in that room, squashed with those folks, talking to them. And I remembered as I was driving home that day, I thought to myself, you know what, Ferrell, even if you don't win the scholarship, it's been worth it. Because it forced me to have a richer experience at OSU than I would have had if I'd just been going through trying to get a bachelor's degree. It made me do exciting things. It made me really push myself and see what I was capable of. Exactly right. And I was so grateful to have the opportunity to work with the folks that helped me. Working with the Bob Grauman's and the Joe Williams and the Wes Hollies of the world. I would have had so much richer life if it had just been that. That's all it really taken. And the opportunity to meet my fellow candidates, for the Truman interview, which some of them I still keep up with today. We still, talk about the day we all interviewed for the Truman there. So I think that's a big part of it. And again, it also taught me to kind of be more open-minded. And I say that because in the process of going through the Scholar Development Program, you're hanging out with a lot of your fellow students that are very articulate, very thoughtful, very well-read, but many of whom may have a different perspective on a lot of issues than you. And as part of the discussions that you have in your preparations and your windows for the world class, etc., you get to see that you can be open to well-reasoned arguments from others and be embracing of that and have a civil, open dialogue and really talk about issues and not just have to be locked into kind of your provincial view of the world and to the effect of tuning out everybody else as well. And I needed that because I came from a small town where everybody kind of has the same values, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong with that at all. But you weren't often confronted with different points of view, and sometimes you need that.
Shannon, help me understand. When you receive the Truman Scholarship, you get to pick where you want to do your graduate education.
Exactly.
And you pick.
I finished up my master's degree at OSU, but fortunately was able to continue on some scholarships I already had there. And then the rest of my award went with me to law school at Oklahoma City University.
Okay, thank you. And we'll get that in just a second. But I want to ask you real quick, can you think some names of other individuals that participate with you here at OSU, the Scholars Program, when you were a student?
Well, the biggest name that pops head is Chris Stevens. Of course, Chris was successful in his pursuit of the Truman, and then Blaine Gretiman. Chris and Blaine and I were all in the same class.
Wow.
As our career went on, our academic years spread apart a little bit, so that Blaine and I won our awards one year, and then Chris the succeeding year. But and there were lots of other great students in there as well. But those were some of the standout names there.
But how many students in a given year would be actually seriously developing themselves for competition for a prestigious scholarship?
I'd say probably around 20 or so. Give or take a little bit. It's not a huge number, and one of the challenges we have is convincing students not so much to go for it, but to convince them that they could do it. Say, hey, you've got the talent, you've got the potential. Let us help you, cultivate that.
Shannon, what do you say to people? I've had a chance to do some interviews now and pick up that there's, in some instances, not a lot, but some instances where people indicated that perhaps we shouldn't be utilizing so many resources and scholarship dollars and time to focus on such a small number of students. Mm-hmm. How would you answer that?
Well, I've been presented the same question as well, and again, you are spending lots of resources on a relatively small number of students, but I think, and this may be almost kind of the I don't know if this is the negative or the positive argument, but it seems like it would be a shame to have students of that level of talent here at Oklahoma State University and not do everything you could to accelerate them as much as you could, because those students, obviously benefit themselves, but the benefits bestowed upon those students radiate out to the students that they're around as well, because I know so many of them reach out to help their fellow students succeed in their classes or their organizations. And again, it's we also have some secondary benefits from that as well, because I think by having some outstanding examples of students that have done so well in that program, we can hold those students forward as an example that really, I think, encourages other supporters to donate perhaps to scholar development, perhaps to other scholars programs across the university, or to scholarship programs themselves, because they say, what if my scholarship dollars could help a student like that? Then I can point to a student and say, hey, I helped someone reach that level of achievement there.
Good point. Are there other student awards and recognitions that you received at Oklahoma State University aside from your Truman Scholarship? You mentioned a couple.
We've talked about the WINS and the freshman research. I would say probably the other than those, the one that probably I was proudest of was my recognitions as a top 10 freshman and top 10 senior, because it was a tremendous honor, but I think it was what made it more of an honor than just the fact that you were a top 10 was the people that had received that award. I mean, the people that I had known that were top 10 freshmen and top 10 seniors were people I held in the absolute highest esteem. And it was an honor to be considered just like them, so to speak. And the other one that was also tremendously important to me, and I was equally proud of, was being the outstanding senior in the College of Agriculture. Again, because there had been so many outstanding people before me that had received that honor, I felt kind of humbled to be put into that company.
Shannon, what about your social life, activities in campus? I mean, anything you can tell me that you
social life
on base here?
It's funny to talk about social life, and I was actually talking with somebody yesterday about this and the fact that our social life equaled our campus life.
Yeah, like what life?
Exactly, and I wouldn't trade it for anything though, because that's how I had my fun, was my clubs, and people say, okay, you're not applying for a scholarship now, you can be honest with us, but it really is true. That's where I had so much fun. That's all my friends from OSU that I still keep up with today are the people that I met through those clubs, and it was the opportunity to meet people and interact and share friendships while you were still doing something good for the college and for the university. And I embraced that so wholeheartedly, because when I was a kid, I got really frustrated when I'd hang out with my dad because we could never get anywhere fast. He would always find somebody he knew, and he'd always have to talk to him, and we'd never make it anywhere because he'd start talking to somebody and he'd get a little closer to the car, and then he'd talk to him kind of in the door of the car. Then he'd be in the car with the window rolled down, still talking to him. And as a little kid, you're saying, Dad, can we go home? It's been 45 minutes. But he told such wonderful stories about the friends they'd made at OSU. I couldn't wait to have those friends. And it's kind of funny, but I think it's true. I think both my dad and myself, and I think you could even say, if there are multiple generations of Cowboys in a family, the friends that you make here, it's as though it's the same play, but different people are playing the parts. Like, everyone has this kind of friend, and for Dad it was this guy, and for me it was this guy, and for my kids it'll be some other guy. But it's so wonderful to see that you've got that kind of continuity all through the generations. And so that was my social life at OSU, was all my organizational work.
Kind of shifting gears here, could you give maybe some highlights of your graduate education here at Oklahoma State, and then we'll get in maybe into your legal career?
I can blame me being a professor on a couple of things pretty first and foremost. Number one was my advisor, Joe Williams. And I thought, wow, if I could have the kind of impact on students that he had, that'd be something that would be a life well spent. And the other thing that Joe Williams did for me was that when I was a graduate student, I did some teaching assistant work. I taught a lab section of his farm and ranch class. Now, prior to that point, I'd done presentations in 4-H, and I'd done public speaking, and that was fun. But that was my first time to really teach. And I really, really had a blast teaching. I mean, I really had fun with it. And more so than I thought I would. And I was kind of surprised by that. And I think that's what kind of sealed my eventual academic fate was the fun that I had as a teaching assistant for Dr. Williams in my graduate program. My graduate work was centered around environmental regulation of large farming operations. Specifically, we were talking about large swine operations, which at that point in time were really starting to be prominent in the state, and it was getting to be kind of a topic of public debate were the environmental impacts of these farms. And I did not know that doing a master's thesis on the economic impacts of increased environmental regulations of these farms was going to eventually dictate my legal career, which, when we talk about law school, we can talk about that, but that would come back to haunt me in my legal career. So
taking your words about teaching, finding something you have passion for and doing it, as you said earlier.
Yep. Yeah. And that really clicked.
So you then went to Oklahoma City University, OSU Law School.
Right.
And let me kind of back and get some dates. You graduated and get your first degree, your bachelor's degree in
98.
98, and then
my master's, in 2000.
2000.
And then went on to law school in 2000, 2003.
Okay. And so did you have in mind, Shannon, when you went to law school, that you wanted that background in policy and then legal background, but did you assume you wanted to get back into teaching at some point then?
My thought was someday I would really like to do that. And famous last words, I told myself, I'd like to go out into the private sector, get some really good experience, kind of make my fortune. And then, once that fortune's made, hopefully by that point in time, this ag law position that I currently have, I thought, 10, 15 years down the road, that'll probably be opening up. That'd be a good time for me to slide back in. Things move along a little quicker than that, but that's perfectly okay. And I've loved it anyway.
So when you graduated, and I think you graduated fifth in your class of 167, something like that.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Then for 4 years, you were in law practice with a couple different firms specializing in
environmental law. And so here's where the pigs come back to bite me, so to speak. I was interviewing with a large firm in Oklahoma City. It was a large general practice firm, had many individualized departments. And they interviewed me and said, well, Shannon, what area would you like to go in? And my thought had always been corporate transactional law because my ag business background, and I was kind of intrigued by the making the deal, so to speak. And I said, well, I've kind of thought about corporate law. They asked, well, would you consider environmental law? And I'm not paraphrasing too much when I said, you guys sign the paychecks. If you want me to do environmental law, I'll happily do environmental law. And the reason they gave was they said, well, we've noticed you've got this background in agricultural, sciences, and your thesis was on an environmental topic. We need somebody in our environmental group, and we think you'd be a good fit. I said, well, hey, sure, I'd be happy to give it a try. And I got into it, and I was surprised at how much I really enjoyed environmental law. I'd always kind of loved the sciences, and, early on in life, I'd kind of thought about being an engineer, but calculus kicked my rear, so engineering was probably out. So it gave me a great opportunity to kind of apply that love of science and couple it with agriculture and the things I'd learned there, and really enjoyed environmental law. It was really a fit for me. Never would have thought it until that point.
So is there a story about how you got back to Oklahoma State then before you got your
before I got my fortune?
Yeah.
Really, it was kind of odd. The person that held the position prior to me retired well before I don't know what I was basing my projections on when she would retire, but I was off. She retired early, and so they were kind of caught in a lurch, and there was no one to teach the agricultural law class, which is which is one of the degree sheet courses for a lot of the ag majors. And they said, we really need somebody to teach this class, or a lot of students are going to fall off the end of the table. So I joined it in kind of as a visiting lecturer just to teach the class. And after I taught it for the first semester, I was just hooked again. You know, I had that love I had for teaching reignited, and I thought, man, if this full-time position opens up, I'd be stupid not to apply for it, because I loved my job in private practice, but I absolutely loved teaching. And I thought, you know what, if it opens up, I'll do it. And I had to run that by my lovely bride. We'd just been married at that point, and it took a little courage to summon up the nerve to ask your wife that you've just married, so would you mind taking a fantastic pay cut if it meant seeing me around Stillwater more often? And bless her heart, my wife, who's got a passion that is equal to my own for OSU and is a third generation OSU grad, she supported me wholeheartedly because she wanted me to be happy, and that's one of the things I truly adore most about her. So she said yes and went through the application process, and here I am. So
what year then did you start teaching full-time at Oklahoma State?
Started teaching full-time in 2007.
Then so you taught for what, a year or two on a part-time basis?
Yeah.
Sure. Can you share a little bit of, Shannon, a little bit of information about your teaching and extension responsibilities and activities now here at OSU?
Sure. From the teaching side, we teach an agricultural law class, which is an undergraduate class. We teach in the fall and spring semesters here. And that's a general survey class of basically all the areas of law that would touch on an agricultural or an agribusiness operation. We talk about everything from contracts and real estate to environmental regulation, wills, trusts, estates, the whole 9 yards. We make the joke that we're a mile wide and an inch deep, but at least we talk about it, make everybody kind of aware of those issues. And then it actually flows very well into my extension program, which is 70% of my appointment. Teaching is 30%. And with my extension appointment, we do agricultural law programming throughout the state. Come up with OSU extension publications to kind of help illuminate issues that would touch and concern our rural landowners, agricultural producers, agribusiness owners. Again, over the entire range of topics. It's a broad net that we cast. So lots of that's in writing, lots of that's now being in presentations out in the public, visiting with folks one-on-one from Guyman to Idabel, or actually from Boise City to Idabel. That's been my range so far. So
from Altus to what?
From Altus to Miami. That's right.
Mercy. So you're on the road quite a bit then, Shannon.
I am. Yep.
So 70% of your time is in extension activities for the college, and then 30% in actual teaching here.
Right. That's correct.
Is that that's a little bit of an unusual combination for most instructors, is it not?
It is, but you know what? It's actually paid off very well because the two actually complement one another. The materials that we develop for class oftentimes are the materials that we can easily adapt to teaching out in the public through extension. And the contact that I have with folks through extension, be they the landowners, agribusiness operators, or anybody like, that gives me some real world experience and perspective that we can bring back to the classroom. And you can tell your students, look, we're not talking about theoretical constructs. This is something that a real landowner faced just a couple of weeks ago. So this happens, you need to be prepared for it. And that kind of gives some relevance to what we teach in the classroom.
That's great. What do you have? How many students do you advise, Shannon?
Right now I've got about 20 students. Yeah.
Okay. Looking down the road, you talked about your first plan change. You didn't get well before you come back to Oklahoma State.
Right.
But looking down the road again, what do you hope to accomplish with your life? What do you hope to contribute to society?
Wow.
I normally wouldn't ask one that, but knowing the kind of guy you are, Shannon, you've probably got a plan.
I have thought about it. When you're a young person and you have these wild aspirations of what you want to do, the thing I always told myself was that, Ferrell, I want to make a tangible, positive difference in the lives of every Oklahoman. That's kind of lofty, and I'm still committed to it. And I think that the way to do that is I want to develop a top flight agricultural law program here at Oklahoma State University, second to none in the nation. And the reason for that, and the reason that I think that fits well with that goal, is that the law in so many aspects is somewhat intimidating for people. They view it as this veil that they can't quite get through, when in fact it's probably more accessible here in the United States than it is anywhere else. And citizens can make a difference in affecting change and influencing their policymakers if they're willing to devote some effort to it, some study to it, and follow the channels. And I think that if we can do a good job of educating folks about what the law is, that positions them well to make decisions and to create change as to what they think it should be. So I view having a top flight program in agricultural law is one thing we can do to make that change in the lives of Oklahomans. And from the student perspective, it's not a real concrete goal, which I feel terrible about, because I tell all my students to have really concrete, distinct goals. But I just want to make as much a difference in the lives of my students as I can. Whether that's, trying to develop the best advising tools to make them, to enable my students to get out of here as quickly as they want to and as cost effective as I can, that's great. But if it's a student that has a need, I want to be able to meet that and to let them know that, as a community at OSU, we really genuinely care about their success and about their well-being. Let them know that this is a place to get a degree, but that's the merest chunk of the OSU experience. And I think the thing that drew me back to OSU so strongly, the thing I knew I would not be able to resist, is the fact that while I was here, I never felt more passionately about what OSU could do to help someone become who they were meant to be. I mean, this was an amazing place to grow and to become. And I just want to be part of that for students, to help them grow and become the person that they know they can be if they really want to be.
That's great. And you're helping some of the students now with their dreams too, I understand. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about your participation as a faculty member now in the OSU Scholar Program?
Yeah, and it's, I've started in earnest, but I've been really fortunate to reconnect with all the folks that I work with in scholar development, and to work on the same things we talked about, doing some application review, doing some of the mock interviews. But what's really been valuable is working with students on the front end, helping them, as a freshman, to say, is this something that I want to pursue? And if so, how do I map out that course to do that? And so it's been very exciting for me to be involved again in every step of that process, and that's something I hope to expand my involvement in the future. So,
yeah, Shannon, could you expand on that just a little bit? I know a couple of people that I've had the opportunity to visit with about the program have talked about how important it is to identify students early on. Some of them even in high school, mm-hmm. and then some, of course, as freshmen at Oklahoma State University. Can you talk a little about the identification process and generally about you specifically?
Sure, and it takes a couple of different avenues. The straightforward way of doing it is you look at the academic records, and of course someone with spectacular ACT scores or a wonderful undergraduate or high school GPA, obviously that stands out, and you kind of look at those students. But the more difficult side of it, and the one that involves a little bit more art than science, so to speak, is just trying to get to know as many students as possible. I mean, you have to kind of cast a wide net and see if you can get an intuitive feel for the students that either you think have the opportunity and the ability to pursue some of those scholarships, or to make it known to some students that you're a person who can serve as kind of a liaison for that program, to let them know I'm accessible, and if you're interested, come talk to me and let's examine what you can do. So it's a two-pronged approach, and they're very different approaches, but you kind of try to use each to their maximum benefit and try to cast a wide net and get everyone a chance that you can.
Do you ever go out and know with Bob Grumman and Bob Spurrier, mm-hmm. who heads up our honors college, and I know talking to Bob spur. You said that they go out occasionally with undergraduate office, admissions office, talk to high school students. Are you ever part of that? Have a chance to go out to the high school events?
I haven't had a chance to do that in a formal basis, but the way that I have done it is I still remain very involved with the 4-H program. And in that role, I try to identify students that I think once we can get them here to Oklahoma State, that we can kind of segue into that program. Another thing that we're working on doing, we used to do in the past, we kind of got away from it and we need to revisit it, is using our extension appointments to our advantage. We're out in the counties talking to folks on a daily basis. Let's incorporate talking to, the local high schools while we're out there anyway and saying, hey, let's talk to students who think they might have an interest. And if they want to pursue these, prestigious national scholarships, let's identify them now as well. And let's position them while they're still in high school to start taking advantage of the opportunities that will lead them down that road.
Shannon, what in the scholars program, I know, again, talking about Spur about honors college, is that an important segue for a lot of students into the scholar development recognition program?
I absolutely think that, and that's one of the things I was very grateful I was a part of, was the honors program. For the reasons that we've already talked about, again, it was one of those programs that would challenge you. But the thing that I love about Oklahoma State University is that I think in many respects, our most challenging environments are also our most supportive environments. And when I say that, the Honors College is a great example. In their honor college, obviously there are higher expectations of our students and we push them hard. But we also do that in a smaller classroom environment than most of their classes. We do that with faculty that are nationally and internationally recognized for their expertise in those fields. And so you find yourself as a student in a more challenging environment, but also equipped with more tools than you might have even if you were part of one of the general courses at the university. So I think that's a tremendous asset for us.
Do you think the success we've had in competing for prestigious scholarships, has that created a little bit of a buzz out there amongst some high school students, and has it created an entree, if you will, for students to think about Oklahoma State University in a different way?
I think so. I think you're exactly right. And I think that in a way it sort of, to use the word, legitimizes something that we already knew. I mean, I think people already knew that it was OSU offered a quality education and that was a terrific environment. But maybe it took winning some of those scholarships for people to say, oh, okay, there really is something to what those Cowboys are doing up there. Of course, our neighbors to the south always boast of their numbers with respect to national merit scholars, which, by the way, OSU competes with very favorably, as a matter of fact. We just don't tout it as much. But having some Trumans and Rhodes and Udalls and Goldwaters and Fulbrights and on and on and on, as we could say, I think tells people, look for the value. OSU really is a tremendous place to be. Why not tap into that resource that's in your backyard?
In addition to yourself, can you think of other faculty members you consider as kind of champions, if you will, for the scholar program that are really passionately involved with it?
Oh, I think so. And I'll focus kind of on my own college here, and not to be too narrow, but maybe even my own department a little bit. I know that Dr. Larry Sanders and Dr. Mike Dix, both of whom teach agricultural policy courses and have research appointments there, have been fantastically supportive of our candidates and helping them analyze their policy statements with respect to the Truman, for example. I know that Dr. Glenn Brown has been very involved in working with our students that are more inclined towards engineering sciences and helping them see the policy tie-ins there. Dr. Jeff Hattie, who's the head of the environmental science program here in the college, has also helped kind of coordinate our students. And our environmental science program is kind of unique here in the College of Agriculture Sciences and Natural Resources because it doesn't have a departmental home. Our environmental science students basically belong to the college. And so that's actually been an advantage in that Dr. Hattie doesn't have departmental boundaries that he really has to contend with. He can cut across all those departments to pull in faculty from anywhere that he needs for that assistance. So those are the examples that I'm most familiar with. But I know across the campus we have faculty from every college that have been wonderfully supportive of that.
Ed Miller, Associate Dean, very.
Ed Miller and Dr. DeBeast also, very much so.
Well, how does the scholar program mesh with, as opposed to competing with, how does it mesh and synergize with other academic programs at the college level, university-wide?
I think it's really kind of an accelerator for those programs, because it provides an opportunity to enrich students that really have a particular gift or passion for a specific area. But of course, we all know that our departments have resource constraints all around them, and there's only so much that can be done. So the wonderful thing about the Scholar Development Program is that, again, it knows no departmental bounds itself. And so whether you're an ag economist or a political scientist or biologist, mechanical engineer, doesn't matter. It provides an environment for enriching experiences regardless of your background.
What do you think should be the goal or goals, desired outcomes of the scholar program for, first of all, for Oklahoma State University, and then perhaps for students?
From the perspective of the university, I think the scholar development program takes, I hate to use this analogy, but it takes a good product and makes it better. I think it gives us an opportunity as a university to say, we've got a tremendously gifted and talented student body, and with that much more investment and support, look at how much more those students can do. And I think that obviously creates some, very high quality product that our university can showcase and show what OSU is capable of. But at the same time, I think that also serves as kind of a prototype for what our other academic units can do. And I've seen it happen even here in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources. It may not be formalized, but I've seen us as a college more and more start to try to develop a capacity to identify talented students early on and position them for greater opportunities with just, again, that much more preparation and investment. From the student perspective, I think that's a tremendous value add for our students, because if all it basically takes is a student self-identifying, saying that they want to, participate that, and if they can show some legitimate, ability to make good on that, the doors are thrown open for them very generously, and it costs them no more as a student in terms of tuition dollars, but just their personal effort to commit to the program as much as those that support it, and you have all those resources made available to you, and it was all just for the asking.
Shannon, you probably know students in the Scholar Development Program who unsuccessfully competed for prestigious scholarships. What do you tell them? I mean, are they failures, or did they benefit from the program in other ways?
I'm glad you asked that, because I had the opportunity to learn that myself and in a scholarship competition that I wasn't successful in, but I've also known other students that haven't succeeded at any of the scholarships they've shot for. And what I find encouraging, and it's not surprising at all, is that to a person, every one of them has said, "I was glad I did it." I've never had to talk any of them down or say, "Chin up, champ, you're doing fine." To a person, they've all said, "I felt like I had the best shot I could have had because of the support and the help that I got." And they felt so much richer for the experience, and that they, again, did some things that they wouldn't have otherwise thought they could have done, and did more than they ever thought was possible anyway, that they were just so glad to do it. They really didn't have all that many regrets.
Shannon, you mentioned the word richer, and I've heard you refer to that in our conversation a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Richer in what ways?
Yeah, I think that lots of students come to OSU with the thought that you got to punch your ticket. In today's workplace, you need to have a bachelor's degree. Okay, I need to have a bachelor's degree. Well, what's the least resistance path for me to get from here to a bachelor's degree? It'd be easy for us to do that. But I think through involvement with programs like the Scholar Development Program, we don't take that path of least resistance, but we do things we wouldn't have otherwise done. We take the hard courses, and then I think in so doing, people realized maybe they were a little smarter than they thought they were. Maybe they were capable of more than they thought they were. And as a result, their target's no longer bachelor's degree. It's, making meaningful contributions in their profession. Or maybe it's going for a graduate degree when they hadn't thought about one previously, but basically becoming more than they really thought they were.
Maybe international experience.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. Thank you. From your unique perspective, as a former student, scholar, and now faculty member, Shannon, how has the university benefited from the scholar program? You mentioned that kind of earlier, but how has the university, perception-wise, regionally, nationally, how has the university benefited from the exposure that we receive in these programs?
Well, I think, to point to a specific example, being named a Truman Honor Institution, as we were, which is a very prestigious honor, and something that very few non-Ivy League or quote unquote prestige schools had ever received, really woke a lot of people up, because they never paid attention to OSU if it wasn't football season or basketball season. Other than that, there was just another university out there in Middle America. But I think receiving that honor really made people understand that OSU is a serious university. This is a place where scholarly activity happens, and it's not just any scholarly activity. It's national, international, caliber scholarly activity. So again, we used the word before, but I think that legitimized a lot of what we do here. And it's not that we changed what we were doing. We were doing it all along, but now people acknowledge that it was happening here. And, success kind of begets success. People find out about that. I think that has a tendency to make students consider OSU that might not have otherwise, because now they know if they're a high school student and they have aspirations of being a Truman or a Rhodes Scholar, they know that they can come to OSU and have a chance of success at that. Whereas previously, maybe they thought they had to go somewhere else to do that.
State, an Ivy, something like that.
Exactly. Somewhere with a lot higher tuition bill.
Exactly. In your opinion, Shannon, what have been the strengths and success of the scholar program through the years?
I think it provided an opportunity for our faculty who wanted to make a contribution above and beyond just the classroom to really have an opportunity to do that. And we have some fantastic classroom teachers here at the university, but I think there were a lot of folks out there that said, I want to do something in addition to that. How can I have another opportunity to interact with students, beyond the honors program as well, which was another opportunity to work with excellent students, but how can we exceed even that? I think another success that we've had is that because our faculty has been so motivated to succeed, in whatever we do, because it's just a wonderful group of individuals, I think we've done a very good job of understanding the selection processes and criteria for a vast number of scholarships, for the Trumans, the Rhodes, the Udalls, the Goldwaters, Javises, we could go on and on and on. But every time we come across a scholarship, I have a group of people that almost kind of, focus on that and really deconstruct it, really understand what kind of candidate are they looking for? How can we identify that kind of student? What's a successful application? What's not a successful application? What's a successful interview and an unsuccessful interview? And helping our students, trained in a focused way and still a genuine way. I don't mean it to sound as though we game the system or anything like that, but I think we do a good job at knowing what those processes require for success and genuinely developing that in the students that have a desire to pursue that opportunity.
Jen, did I hear you saying too, the interaction, one of the successes, perhaps one of the strengths has been the interaction between faculty and students. In a special way, we talked about the freshman and Wentz Research Scholarship Program. We talked about, of course, in the preparation, the training, the helping with the applications, but that intellectual engagement, if you will, between students and faculty. How important is that?
Well, I think it's true. I think that's huge. And, I'd point out a couple of elements of that. Number one, I always tell my advisees and my students, we professors are humans. We like for people to be interested in the same stuff that we're interested in. And if you talk to your professor outside of class, oh my gosh, it's like Christmas, came early. Because like, wow, they're really interested in the stuff I'm talking about. They're not just trying to get a grade. Well, this is that writ large, because you can find a student who's passionate about the thing that you're passionate about as well. And it gives you an opportunity to work with that student that so many faculty, I think, really crave. They would love to have a student come to them outside of a class setting and say, I just want to learn more about your area. How gratifying is that for an instructor? And so this is an opportunity through the Scholar Development Program where we can take that and point it in a direction and really make it pay off both for student and for faculty member. The other side of that is that it creates the opportunity for a mentoring relationship where that opportunity might not have existed otherwise. And it's not as though we have like formal assignments or any sort of really formalized program. But I've never known of a faculty member in the course of the Scholar Development Program who didn't enthusiastically embrace a student, even if they weren't from their own department. And I, again, harken back to the example of Courtney Timmons. And Courtney was a biosystems engineering student, the furthest thing you could be from an ag economist almost. But I worked very closely with Courtney on her application because it had some environmental aspects to it, which fit my private practice days. And I thought absolutely nothing of it, just because I was so joyed to work with someone so passionate about what they did that I was happy to do it. And again, we wouldn't have had that opportunity had it not been for the Scholar Development Program.
Well, many universities develop their scholar programs similar to how Oklahoma State University did, and the competition for prestigious scholarships already fierce is becoming even more competitive. What changes will OSU have to make, and what components we need to enhance to remain competitive in this environment going forward?
I think number one is, and as we've already kind of mentioned this, is again try to identify those folks as early as possible. And I think that the key is almost reaching back there into high school, and positioning our students, say, look, as you finish up your junior and senior year, let's start doing these things that will help you open up these opportunities once you come to campus that'll position you as a standout candidate for the scholarship. I think we'll probably have to get more creative in our course offerings because to date we've done a lot with the already existing courses that we have and trying to enrich that experience. And we've had a couple of courses that have been created basically to advance the Scholar Development Program. I think we're going to have to do more of that. But again, with our faculty and with our students, I think there are a lot of opportunities to put some course offerings out there that not only provide, kind of the content to help advance our students intellectually, but I think we can provide some very meaningful experiences and meaningful service opportunities that will set our candidates apart. What comes to mind is the new innovations class, which we have here in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources, that cuts across a number of our departments. It's jointly taught by our ag economics, agricultural communications, biosystems, ag engineering. I mean, basically all of our departments share in this class where students take on real world issues and come up with real world solutions that real world companies go out and implement. And that's, again, is something that very few undergraduates have the opportunity to do, to work with the private sector like that. We've got that culture of innovation here at OSU, and I think if we tap into it, we can provide some offerings that will really advance our candidates compared to everyone else.
You think giving students more international opportunities, more opportunities, internships here in the U.S. and Oklahoma, these kinds of things, is what I hear you saying?
I think that's exactly right. And I'm so encouraged by the strides that we've made in international study here at OSU. Matter of fact, if I had one regret about my academic career, I wish I would have spent more time in international study. Because I had one international study experience, which was tremendous. I wish I would have done more of that. I think that is very important. And again, I think the practical real world experiences where people as students make a difference is going to be very important, because at any university you can take classes, you can make good grades, you can do research, but it's much more difficult, but much more rewarding also, I think, to have those sorts of real world impacts where you can say, hey, I put my money where my mouth was. I went out, I rolled up my sleeves, and I, did it, so to speak.
What will be critical, and perhaps we've answered this in some ways, but I'd like to ask it one more time. What will be critical to the the scholar program's continued success? What kind of resources do we need to provide for it? What do we need to do?
I think wow, this is going to sound like an ag economist answer, but of course, it always comes back to dollar signs, right? And I think some additional financial support is important, but let me explain. It's not just that throwing money at the problem solves it, which clearly it doesn't. It takes time to engage in this sort of activity. I mean, you've got time spent in applications, you've got time spent in preparation, you may be taking more hours than you absolutely have to take. That costs money. And I don't want to ever see our students not pursue this objective because of a financial constraint. So I think that having some scholarship dollars to defray costs of things like our international study, or just providing just more scholarship dollars so that a student may not have to work as much and thus free up some time for them to pursue the things they need to be doing to advance their candidacy. I think that's very important. I think, the more money that we could have for undergraduate research experience, the better, because again, as we've talked about, that has tremendous value to our candidates. And then that may not be something that we do centrally through scholar development. That might just be something that we all have to look at as a university to say, we recognize that so much of our research dollars goes towards the graduate student level, but let's look at, let's make a concerted, conscious effort to see how we can allocate research dollars to enabling undergraduates to participate in those experiences as well.
Shannon, would it make any sense at all to think about some release time from teaching to, as opposed to putting more staff on Bob Grauman's team, but to maybe give faculty support to maybe, quarter time, a little bit here and there, at least to help with the program, or to be more engaged? Is that something you've thought about?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that we've benefited so much from people that just did it out of their sheer good nature. They want to see students succeed, but there's really not a vehicle for those faculty members to receive any sort of professional recognition for that, from the perspective of evaluation as the advancement of their academic career through promotion and tenure, or as any virtue of their appointment. But, by gosh, that provides a lot of value to the university. And I think it is a valuable professional contribution. We just lack a vehicle for recognizing that. And that might be the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, to enable us to do that.
Shannon, we've had a lot of conversation, and I appreciate your answers and your insight. Is there anything is there an aspect we haven't talked about that you'd like to cover? Some comments you'd like to make as we conclude here?
Just trying to think. Is there anything we haven't talked about? And it may be going back in the last issue we talked about. We've benefited so tremendously from the willingness of our administration to support the scholar development offices, and to take Bob Grauman, who used to do this, as kind of a part-time gig himself, to move in that, and that's been one of the most tremendous single moves is given Bob, kind of the reins to really pursue his passion full time. That's tremendous. I can't say enough how grateful I was to all of the faculty members that took their time when it wasn't recognized. It was just them being, them loving what they do to help me out, because I know I would not be where I am or doing what I'm doing had it not been for them. And I've been constantly encouraged to see that cycle keeps continuing, and there are ever more faculty members that want to be a part of that, and I think our students are so much richer for it.
Would it make sense to have heard a couple comments that perhaps we should look at maybe endowing our program, or at least as part of our next comprehensive campaign that's on the horizon, to invest some time in fundraising to support the scholar program.
Without a doubt, because I don't know that there could be any higher return on an endowment investment than putting it right there. And as somebody who grew up in extension, where we were always trying to figure out how to beg and plead the county commissioners to come up with a budget, having an endowment, a pot of money that is solely dedicated to that purpose, gives tremendous security, and that security is so valuable because when you quit worrying about where the next budget's going to come from, and you can focus on what you're meant to be doing, and that's tremendously liberating, I think, to anybody.
You need further comments?
I'm none other than to say I'm just tremendously proud and excited to be part of the story of the Scholar Development Office, and I hope there's lots more stories to come.
We've got some coming down the pike. Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry.